I never thought I'd end up in the middle of a neighborhood showdown, but here I am, staring out over what used to be my peaceful lakefront view, now tangled in red tape and spite. I've lived in this lakeside community for nearly a decade. It's a small, quiet place where everyone's supposed to look out for one another. The kind of place where you know your neighbors by name and trust that the homeowners association exists to keep things fair. That's what I believed anyway, until the day I found out Karen had given my lakefront access away to her cousin. The lake has always been my sanctuary. After long days at work, coming home to the gentle ripple of the water and the soft calls of the loons was the one constant that kept me grounded. My property ends right where the trees thin out to reveal the shimmering surface. It's more than just a backyard to me. It's where I spent summer evenings fishing off the dock my late grandfather built, where I watched sunsets paint the sky with colors you only see when the world slows down. Losing access to that place felt like losing a part of myself. Our HOA is run by a board elected from the neighborhood, and Karen is the president. You know the type. Loud, sharp-tongued, and always with an air of superiority that never quite sits right with the rest of us. At first, I thought she was just a little bossy, maybe over-enthusiastic about keeping things in order, but over time, her true colors started showing. Karen loves control and power more than community. It's not about fairness or respect, it's about her agenda, and that became painfully clear when she quietly slipped my lakefront rights over to her cousin. It wasn't like I received a formal letter or a warning. I found out by accident during a neighborhood meeting when Karen mentioned her cousin's new dock, right on the shoreline I've always had access to. I blinked in disbelief, thinking I must have misunderstood. But no, she made it sound like it was perfectly normal, even a favor. The HOA had approved the use of my lakefront by her cousin without ever informing me or, as far as I could tell, consulting anyone else. That moment hit me like a punch to the gut. How could they just hand over something that belonged to me? I remembered the purchase documents, the surveys that clearly marked the property lines and lake access points. This was my land, my water's edge. The fact that the HOA board, led by Karen, had made this decision behind my back felt like a betrayal from a community I once trusted. I tried to keep my cool during the meeting, asking questions calmly, requesting to see the official documents. Karen brushed me off with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and a vague promise that it was all within the rules. Her tone was condescending, as if I were some meddlesome outsider. I left that meeting feeling powerless and more than a little angry. How had it come to this? Over the next few days, I reached out to other neighbors, hoping to find some allies, or at least people who understood how wrong this felt. Some sympathized, but were too afraid of Karen's influence to speak up. Others seemed indifferent, caught up in their own lives or convinced the HOA's word was final. It felt like I was standing alone on a shrinking island, watching my lakefront slip further away. The worst part was watching Karen's cousin move in. They set up a small dock, brought out their kayaks, and began treating the space as if it had always belonged to them. Each time I looked out my window, the scene felt more like an invasion than a neighborly use of shared space. I wondered how Karen could justify such a move, how she could look me in the eye and pretend it was fair. Despite the frustration and hurt, I knew I couldn't just sit back and watch. That lakefront was part of my story, my history. I had to find a way to fight back, to reclaim what was rightfully mine, even if it meant going against the entire HOA and their queen bee. Little did I know that the battle ahead would test my patience, my resolve, and lead to a confrontation that would leave the whole neighborhood speechless. Finding out that Karen had given my lakefront to her cousin was bad enough, but what came after made it clear that this wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. It was a calculated move that left me feeling blindsided and angry. At first I tried to believe there had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe the HOA had gotten confused about property lines. I pulled out all the paperwork I had from when I bought my place, scanning over the deeds and survey maps to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. Every mark confirmed what I already knew. My property included that stretch of shore, and the right to use the lakefront however I wished. No one had the authority to hand that over without my consent. Armed with this knowledge, I went back to the HOA board, hoping they would correct whatever mix-up had happened. I showed them the paperwork and asked for a meeting to discuss the issue. Karen was there, of course, along with a few other board members who seemed reluctant to get involved. Karen's calm but cold smile made it clear she wasn't interested in admitting any wrongdoing. She kept saying the decision was within our community guidelines and approved in the best interest of the neighborhood. I pressed her for details, but all I got were vague references to some new community access policy that no one else seemed to have heard about. It was maddening. How could a policy that gave away someone's private property be legal or ethical? I asked to see the policy in writing, but Karen dodged every request. Her cousin's new dock was already in place, and Karen acted as if the whole situation was settled and not open to discussion. The other board members didn't say much, as if they were used to Karen running the show and making decisions behind closed doors. I realized then that fighting the HOA was going to be tougher than I imagined. I tried talking to Karen privately, hoping to appeal to some sense of fairness. I explained how much the lakefront meant to me, sharing memories of my grandfather's dock, the quiet mornings spent fishing, and the sunsets that made this place special. I told her how painful it was to watch her cousin take over the shoreline I'd cherished for years. But Karen just smiled and said the board had to make decisions that benefit the whole community, and sometimes that meant sacrifices. Her words felt like a slap in the face. This wasn't a sacrifice, it was a theft. My frustration turned into a quiet determination not to give up. I contacted a few neighbors, hoping to rally support or at least find out if anyone else had experienced similar treatment. Some listened, but seemed too afraid to get involved. Karen had a reputation for being difficult and intimidating, and many preferred to avoid conflict. Others just shrugged and said it was easier to accept the situation than to fight it. I understood their hesitation but refused to accept their resignation. Every time I looked out the window and saw Karen's cousin's kayaks lined up on the shore, I felt my anger simmer. It wasn't just about access to the water anymore. It was about respect and standing up for what's right. I tried writing letters to the HOA, outlining my concerns and asking for a formal review. I requested mediation or a community meeting. My letters went unanswered or received short, dismissive replies. Karen maintained her silence or sent back generic responses that never addressed the heart of the issue. The tension in the neighborhood started to grow. Some neighbors whispered behind their hands, sharing their own frustrations about Karen's leadership. A few even hinted at past disputes where she had exercised her power unfairly, but none were willing to step forward publicly. I found myself caught between wanting to protect my property and not wanting to turn my home into a battleground. One afternoon, I decided to visit the lakefront myself. Walking along the edge of what should have been my land, I saw the fresh footprints near the new dock and the worn path Karen's cousin had created through the brush. It felt like an invasion, a betrayal. I thought about all the times I had pictured my kids playing by the water, about family gatherings and quiet mornings. The lakefront was supposed to be ours, mine. Instead, it was slipping further away with each passing day. I realized that polite requests and formal channels were getting me nowhere. Karen and the HOA were acting as if my objections didn't matter. This wasn't just a property dispute. It was a power play, and I was losing. But I wasn't ready to give up. I knew I had to find another way to fight back, to reclaim what was mine and send a message that I wouldn't be pushed aside. That decision marked the beginning of a new chapter in this battle, one where I would take control in a way Karen never expected. The lakefront belonged to me, and if the HOA refused to recognize it, I would find a way to make sure everyone else did too. The fight was far from over, and soon the entire neighborhood would be watching. Little did they know, the move I was planning would leave them all speechless. As the weeks passed, what had started as a quiet disagreement turned into something far more intense. Karen's true nature revealed itself in ways I hadn't expected, and the conflict over my lakefront became the battleground for a power struggle that shook the whole neighborhood. At first, I thought maybe if I stayed calm and reasonable, I could find common ground. But Karen made it clear early on that was not her style. She wasn't interested in listening or compromise. She wanted control, and she wasn't afraid to use intimidation to get it. I remember one particularly heated HOA meeting where I stood up to ask for a formal vote on whether Karen's cousin should continue to have access to my lakefront. The room was packed with neighbors, many watching with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Karen sat at the head of the table, radiating confidence, as if she owned the place. When I spoke, her eyes narrowed, and she cut me off with a sharp tone. She accused me of stirring up drama and trying to undermine the community's best interests. It felt like she was personally attacking me, but I refused to back down. Her cousin sat quietly nearby, smiling politely, but watching every move. I caught their eyes for a brief moment, and I could see they were well aware of the tension they had caused, yet they seemed content to enjoy the privileges granted to them. Karen's behavior was dismissive, almost mocking, as if she enjoyed the discomfort she was causing. The meeting ended without any vote, and Karen announced the matter was closed. No discussion, no resolution, just her decision, final and unquestionable. Outside the meeting, I tried to talk to some neighbors who seemed uncomfortable but hesitant to speak out. A few confided that Karen had a history of strong-arm tactics. Some recalled times when she had pushed through controversial decisions by steamrolling over others. The word Karen was often muttered with frustration, but few were willing to confront her directly. I started to realize I was up against more than just a difficult board president. I was facing a woman who thrived on power and had built a small empire within the HOA. One afternoon, I found a note slipped under my door. It was anonymous but unmistakably meant to warn me off. It suggested that pushing further would only make things worse for me and my family. The tone was threatening, cold. I wondered if it came from Karen's camp or someone else who feared rocking the boat. Instead of scaring me, it fueled my resolve. If anything, it showed how far they were willing to go to keep me silent. Karen's cousin began to use the lakefront more openly. I would sometimes catch them fishing or setting up chairs near the water, completely disregarding my presence. I tried to remain civil, greeting them politely, but they never responded. It was clear they had been handed the space as a privilege, not a neighborly right. It hurt to watch them enjoy what had been my sanctuary, but I kept reminding myself that I had every legal right to reclaim it. The board meetings became increasingly tense. Karen would often interrupt me mid-sentence or redirect conversations away from my concerns. She employed a mix of sarcasm and condescension, making me feel like my objections were trivial. When I brought up the lakefront access again, she waved it off as old grievances and suggested I focus on bigger community issues. It was a tactic to minimize me and discourage further protest. Other neighbors started to take notice. Some voiced quiet support in passing, while others avoided eye contact, unwilling to get involved. It became clear that Karen's influence had created a silent majority that preferred peace over justice, at least on the surface. The few who did stand with me felt the weight of Karen's social power pressing down on them. It was lonely, but I wasn't about to let isolation stop me. I also noticed subtle changes around my property. One morning I found small rocks piled along the edge of my yard near the lake, placed there in a way that seemed meant to block easy access. A few days later, some shrubs near the shoreline had been trimmed back suspiciously, as if to alter the natural boundary lines. I reported these actions to the HOA, but Karen dismissed my concerns, calling them routine maintenance. I couldn't help but think these were deliberate moves to make my claim weaker and prepare the ground for her cousin's presence. Despite all this, I held on to the belief that standing up for myself was the right thing to do. I spent hours researching my rights, talking to local officials, and even consulting a lawyer to understand what options I had. Karen's reign over the HOA felt like a personal vendetta, but I knew the law was on my side. I just had to be patient and strategic. Yet the emotional toll was undeniable. I felt exhausted by the constant battles and the way Karen wielded her power like a weapon. Every interaction with her was a reminder that this wasn't just about property lines. It was about respect, dignity, and the right to call my own home what I wanted it to be. But I wasn't about to give in. Not yet. In fact, that feeling of being cornered only pushed me further. If Karen thought she could silence me, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. I began planning something that would not only protect my lakefront but also send a clear message to Karen and her cousin that I was not someone to be crossed. The fight was escalating, and soon, the whole neighborhood would be watching. What happened next would change everything. The more Karen pushed, the clearer it became that words alone wouldn't solve anything. My polite letters, my attempts to reason with the board, even my efforts to gather support from neighbors, they all fell on deaf ears. Karen controlled the narrative and the decisions, and no amount of logic or fairness would sway her. Watching her cousin take over my lakefront, knowing the HOA had turned a blind eye, stirred a fire inside me that I couldn't ignore. I had to take action myself, and that meant drawing a clear line literally. The idea of building a fence came to me one evening as I sat on my porch watching the sunset dip behind the lake. I imagined a strong boundary that couldn't be crossed, a statement that this was my land and my water's edge, no matter what the HOA said. It was not just about blocking access. It was about reclaiming my space, protecting what was rightfully mine in a way that could not be dismissed or ignored. The fence would speak louder than any letter or meeting ever could. I started planning immediately. I measured the area carefully, visualizing how the fence would run along the edge of my property, following the natural curves of the shoreline. I wanted it to be sturdy and noticeable, but also in keeping with the natural beauty of the area. Something simple but unmistakable. I sketched designs late into the night, weighing options between wood, metal, and other materials. I needed something durable, something that would last through storms and seasons without fading into the background. Gathering materials was a challenge in itself. I visited local hardware stores, picking out posts, planks, nails, and tools. Each trip made the plan feel more real. I could almost hear the sound of hammer against wood and smell the fresh pine before the project even began. I shared the idea with a few close friends and family, and their encouragement gave me the strength to move forward despite the weight of what lay ahead. Some warned me about potential backlash, others worried it might escalate tensions. But I knew this was the right step. The day I started building, I felt a strange mix of anxiety and determination. I worked alone at first, digging holes for the posts along the shoreline, careful to avoid any buried roots or rocks. My hands blistered, and the sun beat down hot, but with each nail I hammered, I felt a little more in control. This fence was more than wood and metal. It was my answer to years of feeling powerless. It was a way to stand up to Karen and her cousin without waiting for them to give me permission. Neighbors began to notice. Some stopped by to watch, some asked questions, and a few even offered to help. Their curiosity was clear, but so was the tension. I wasn't surprised when word got back to the HOA. Karen herself drove by one afternoon, slowing down to glare at the progress. I caught her eye, and the coldness in her stare was unmistakable. It was a silent battle, and I was not backing down. As the fence took shape, I found myself reflecting on what this meant. This wasn't just about property lines anymore. It was about respect and standing firm in the face of injustice. I wasn't building a barrier just to keep Karen's cousin off my land. I was reclaiming my peace of mind. I wanted my family to know that sometimes you have to fight for what's yours, no matter how difficult it might seem. The construction took longer than I expected, with unexpected delays and some tough moments. There were days when my back ached, when the nails bent or the posts wouldn't stay straight, but I kept going. Each obstacle was a reminder of why I was doing this. By the time the last plank was secured, the fence stood as a bold line between my property and the lake, clear and unmistakable. I knew this fence would change everything. It was more than just wood on soil. It was a message that I would no longer be pushed around or ignored. Karen and her cousin had taken my lakefront without a second thought, but now, with this fence, the whole neighborhood would see that I was serious. It was a turning point, and I was ready for whatever came next. Building the fence became more than a project. It became my daily ritual, a way to reclaim what was mine, one plank at a time. I spent early mornings and late afternoons working along the shoreline, the rhythm of hammering nails and the scent of fresh-cut wood grounding me in the middle of the chaos that had taken over my life. There were moments when I felt exhausted and frustrated, but every inch of fence that went up strengthened my resolve. This was my stand, my way of saying that my lakefront was not for taking. Neighbors started to talk, some stopping by to watch, others quietly observing from their own yards. A few offered to lend a hand or bring water on hot days. I appreciated the support, but I knew that others were watching with wary eyes, waiting to see how Karen and the HOA would react. It was like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath, waiting for the next move in a game none of us wanted to be playing. Still, I kept working, focused on the task ahead. The fence itself was simple but sturdy, made from rough-hewn cedar planks that blended naturally with the woods around the lake. I chose a design that was tall enough to block easy access but not so high that it felt like a prison wall. I wanted it to be a clear boundary, a statement without being hostile. Each post was set deep into the ground and secured with concrete, ensuring it would stand through storms and time. As the structure took shape, it felt less like a barrier and more like a reclaiming of my peace and dignity. The day I finished the fence, I stood back and looked at it with a mix of pride and relief. It was a physical mark of my fight, a testament to the hours of hard work and the refusal to be silenced. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the water and making the wood glow warmly. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe now, things would start to change. It didn't take long for Karen and her cousin to notice. The next morning, I saw Karen's car slow down as she drove past my property. She stopped, got out, and walked toward the fence, her expression unreadable. I watched from inside my house, heart pounding, as she ran her hand along the smooth cedar and circled the posts. Her cousin was there too, standing just behind her, arms crossed and clearly surprised. Neither of them said a word at first. I stepped outside and met them near the gate. Karen's eyes were sharp and calculating. She said, "I see you've made quite the statement." There was a mixture of anger and grudging respect in her voice, like she hadn't expected me to actually follow through. Her cousin didn't speak but kept glancing at the fence, clearly taken aback by how solid and permanent it looked. "I built this fence because my lakefront was taken from me without my permission," I said calmly. "This is my property, and I intend to protect it." The words felt good coming out, steady and sure. Karen narrowed her eyes but said nothing more, turning on her heel and walking back to her car. Her cousin stayed behind a moment longer, then followed. After that, news of the fence spread quickly through the neighborhood. Some neighbors came by to compliment the craftsmanship or offer support, while others whispered about the tension it had created. The fence became a symbol of defiance, a clear line drawn in the sand that no one could ignore. Karen's influence still loomed large, but this fence was a reminder that I was no longer willing to be pushed aside. The HOA held an emergency meeting soon after, trying to address the sudden change. Karen attempted to rally support for removing or altering the fence, calling it a disruption to community harmony. But this time, I was ready. I presented my documentation, my research, and a clear statement of my rights. Some neighbors spoke in my favor, encouraged by the courage it took to stand up to Karen's control. The atmosphere in the room shifted. For once, it felt like the tide was turning. Still, the battle wasn't over. Karen's refusal to back down and the continued presence of her cousin at the lakefront kept the situation tense. But every time I walked along my fence, feeling the smooth wood beneath my fingertips, I was reminded of what I had won. This fence wasn't just wood and nails. It was my voice made visible. It was my refusal to be ignored. Looking back, I realized that building the fence was about more than protecting my property. It was about standing up for myself and demanding respect in a community that had tried to silence me. Karen may have started this fight by giving away what was mine, but in the end, it was my determination and hard work that changed the story. The fence left them speechless, and for the first time, I felt like I had the power to change the course of this neighborhood's future. The days following the fence's completion felt like walking into a new world. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface didn't disappear overnight, but something had shifted. Karen's usual tight grip on the neighborhood loosened just a bit, as if the fence had exposed cracks in her authority no one had dared to show before. I wasn't naive enough to think the battle was over, but I could feel the weight of the long fight lifting from my shoulders, replaced by a quiet sense of victory. The HOA board called a special meeting to address the situation. Karen came prepared, of course, with her usual air of confidence and a stack of papers she insisted showed the fence was a violation of community guidelines. She argued it disrupted the visual harmony of the lakefront and created division among neighbors. I listened patiently, then calmly presented my own documentation, property deeds, survey maps, and legal advice confirming my right to build the fence on my land. I spoke from the heart about how much the lakefront meant to me and the years of frustration I endured watching my sanctuary slip away. Some neighbors who had been silent before finally found their voices. They spoke about fairness, respect, and the need for transparency in the HOA's decisions. Slowly, the room's energy changed from support for Karen's hardline stance to a growing recognition that I had been treated unfairly. Even those who hadn't spoken up before looked at me with something new, a respect that wasn't there in the past. Karen was still defiant, refusing to admit any fault, but the momentum was no longer in her favor. The board voted to allow the fence to remain, recognizing my property rights and agreeing that any future decisions about shared spaces needed to be communicated openly and fairly. It was a small victory for the community as a whole, a step toward healing the divisions that Karen's leadership had deepened. In the weeks that followed, I noticed changes around the neighborhood. Conversations became less guarded, and a few neighbors approached me with apologies for staying quiet. There was a new sense of cautious optimism, a hope that fairness could return to the HOA's processes. Karen's influence did not vanish completely, but her position was less absolute, and others began to question her decisions more openly. On a personal level, the fence became more than just a barrier. It was a symbol of standing up for myself when everything seemed stacked against me. I found pride in knowing I took control of the situation, rather than letting it consume me. It reminded me that respect is earned, not given, and sometimes you have to fight for what matters most. The lakefront was once again a place of peace and joy for my family, a space where memories could be made without fear of being pushed out. There were challenges along the way. Karen and her cousin still tried to test the boundaries, occasionally approaching the fence or lingering nearby, but I stood firm. My neighbors noticed and stood quietly with me, reinforcing that this was no longer just a personal fight but a community stand for fairness and respect. The experience taught me the importance of resilience and the power of community, even when that community feels divided. Looking back, I realized that the conflict had changed me. It forced me to face uncomfortable truths about the people I thought I could trust and showed me the importance of speaking up even when the odds feel overwhelming. The fight over the lakefront was about much more than land. It was about dignity, fairness, and holding on to what matters in the face of unfairness. Today, when I walk along the fence, I no longer feel anger or resentment. Instead, I feel a quiet satisfaction, knowing that I protected my home and stood my ground. The lake reflects the afternoon sun just as beautifully as it did before, and the sounds of water lapping against the shore bring a sense of calm I thought I had lost. The neighborhood, while still imperfect, feels a little more like home again. Karen never quite recovered the control she once had, and her cousin eventually moved away. The fence remained standing, a quiet testament to what can happen when you refuse to be silenced. In the end, it was not just the fence that left them speechless, but the strength and determination behind it. I hope this story serves as a reminder to anyone who feels powerless that sometimes the greatest power lies in standing up for yourself and never backing down.